And so this is why we're talking about this today. So when we talk about embedding DEI into people's organizations, these are the three buckets that we really look at here at Boxed. There is equipping leaders, and these are not necessarily sequential, but I'm going to talk about them going left to right. So we talk about equipping leaders, so helping them understand their roles as system shapers, because the decisions that they make will shape the whole organization. They are also role models for their teams in terms of the behaviors that we want to drive throughout the organization. The second bucket is evolving organizational systems. And this is what we're really going to be focusing on today. And then the third piece that we talk about is expanding teams' capacity for inclusion. So enabling them to have dialogue about really difficult conversations, and then also changing the way they work. So changing the rituals that they engage in and how they interact with one another to create greater inclusion on the team. Because this is probably going to be obvious to all of you, you cannot do one without the other. And I'm going to explain to you the relationships of each of these. So the reason why it's important that we equip leaders is leaders determine and prioritize the changes when it comes to evolving your organizational systems. They're the ones who are going to decide, these are the initiatives we're going to invest in, these are the processes that we're going to stop, these are the things that we're going to start measuring. This is why we really encourage leaders, before we even go to embarking on major organizational change, they're going through their own journey as it relates to DEI, understanding how their experience in the world will shape the way that they think and therefore how they decide. At the same time, because like with any system, it is things will impact each other. As you change the organizational systems, aka the waters that everybody's swimming in, that also drives and reinforces the leader's own behaviors. And teams also play a role as it relates to the organizational systems. They're the ones who are actually executing. A leader says, okay, we're going to invest in this initiative. They're the ones who are actually executing it and bringing that to life. And same with the leaders, the organizational waters that they swim in will also drive and reinforce their behaviors. And then when it comes to the interaction between leaders and teams as it relates to DEI, the leaders create the environment for teams to have greater capacity for inclusion. And mutually, leaders and teams are holding each other accountable for doing what they say that they're going to do. And of course, helping each other in that learning journey. Learning, especially in the DEI space, I would say is very difficult to do as an island, as a solo individual. It is so much about the other person and understanding other people's experiences and how the world is shaping all of that. So let me walk you through our framework for how we think about organizational systems. We call this our org design sandwich, and why we call it a sandwich will become very clear shortly. But bear with me on this one. So think of your strategy and your culture forming the sandwich of your organization. By that, I mean your strategy is the true driver of how your organization needs to be set up or designed, and your culture forms the foundation. These two pieces, you want them to be completely in sync. Your culture has to support your strategy. And the rest of the sandwich, I'm going to walk you through this one by one. So the stuff in the middle, that's what I would call the meat of your organization design. Again, I said this earlier, your strategy, which is how you create value and compete for clients or customers in this world, that's what drives everything here. It helps you decide what kind of structure should we be having. So by structure, a lot of people think just of org charts. It's more than that. It's think of it as how work is organized and therefore which functions you're going to have, what kinds of roles you're going to have in the organization, and what kind of decision-making authority is going to be concentrated at different pockets of the organizations and at different levels. Then moving over to the right, now you have your work organized, you know what needs to get done. Now this is how your processes are, how the work is actually going to get done. So how do those roles and functions within the structure actually start working together to start delivering that value that your strategy has identified? Moving down to the bottom right hand of the screen are the enablers. So as people are doing their work, as they're going through the processes, what are the things that enable them to do their jobs well? So we're talking about tools, ways of working, or rituals, physical and virtual environments. So not just office spaces, but also the virtual environments, especially now in this distributed world, the virtual places where people are interacting. Swinging over to the left side, you have the metrics and rewards. So as people are doing their work, how are we measuring that success, and what are we rewarding at the org level, meaning the whole organization, at the team level, and also at the individual level? And of course, at the center of all of this are your people, the ones that make this whole thing go. So, what kinds of experiences, skills, and mindsets do they have? Your workforce plan, including not just your employees, but all types of other workers, contractors, consultants. So, figuring out how you build that so that it is meeting all the things on the left side, on the right side, and definitely your strategy. And then, of course, as it relates to your people, your talent management practices. So, who and how you hire, develop them, promote them, retain them, and even how you exit them. You'll notice here that there are double arrows between the meat of the sandwich and culture, because culture plays a very special role when it comes to organization design. It will exist by the fact when you start bringing people together, a culture will start to form. The question is it a culture that will serve your strategy or not? And the way you answer that question is by creating a culture with intention. And the way you do that is not just by declaring that these are our values and this is the kind of culture we're going to have. The way you actually shape culture is by tweaking all these things in this bucket, in the buckets above it, all the meat of the sandwich. That's how you start shifting culture. And the goal, I would say, across this entire sandwich is alignment. You want them all driving towards the same outcome. You don't want your structure pulling people's focus one way and then your process is actually forcing their behaviors another way. So you can think of the left side of your sandwich as driving people's focus. What is important? What is it that we need to do? And the right side as how are we going to do this? You want all of this marching in the same direction. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. What I'm going to do now is actually walk you through how each of these elements can support your DEI strategy. A lot of people will think of DEI sitting very much in the people space. If you want DEI to really succeed in your organization, you want it embedded in all pieces. Let's go through this one by one. So you have your strategy. So as I had said earlier, this is how you create value for customers. And this is how you compete against competitors. So this is how you differentiate yourselves to make yourselves the choice of your customers. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how companies have done that. So this first example is Beneficial State Bank. So they are a community development bank based in Oakland, and they provide loan capital to businesses that are owned by people from underserved and historically oppressed groups, or whose products and services are intended to improve the lives of others and support sustainability. I'm reading, so I got that directly from their website. And you can see here, this is a great example. This customer chose to work with Beneficial State Bank precisely because their strategy so overtly and explicitly highlights their commitment to social justice. Another great example of embedding inclusion and equity into your business strategy. This is Fenty Beauty. I don't know if I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it by now. So Fenty Beauty, they're on a mission to provide beauty for all. So they have 50 shades of foundation versus the standard 10 with a lot of other makeup brands. And honestly, they have become the new standard that other companies have to compete against in terms of inclusivity. I'm going to continue the makeup trend. Fluid, they also expand their target market. So they include all people who want to wear makeup, not just women or women who identify as women. So their messaging is strategically inclusive when they say makeup for him, her, them, and everyone. So these three examples are examples of how you can put an external focus or a customer focused bend to your strategy as it relates to DEI. You can also include DEI with an internal focus in your business strategy. So I'm going to use us as an example because this is one that I know for a fact is true. So at Boxed, we are a consulting firm. One of our major differentiators versus other consulting firms out there is the diversity of our teams. We have a variety of perspectives and backgrounds, and our clients love us for that because they know that they're not just getting one lens of the world. And it helps us definitely compete with other firms out there. And this is something that we have put in our strategy, and it's something we safeguard very carefully, precisely because it is a differentiator for us. Contrast that maybe, let's say, with an automotive manufacturing company, it may not be as critical to their business strategy, but for us, it's central. Well, let's move forward to the next one, which is the bottom half of the sandwich, your culture. So think of culture as the shared assumptions and values that guide people's behaviors. A lot of people will say it's how things are done here. But let's break up culture to make it a little bit more tangible. We'll break it up into three categories. So visible artifacts, so things that you can see with your eyes. Language, so how people talk to one another, and then of course unspoken rules. So think of the first two, the visible artifacts and the languages, being the explicit parts of your culture, and then the unspoken rules are the implicit part of it. So my first example, so thinking of visible artifacts, looking at your mission and vision and manifestos. This is a great example from Mozilla. This is also from their website. You can see here how they have highlighted how important it is to them that their internet is for all peoples of the earth. And it is. They want to catalyze collaboration among diverse communities. So they are putting this out there, not just for the employees, but for the world to see that this is what we stand for. So this is one example of a visible artifact signaling the importance of DEI to this organization. Another example, this is around values, is with Launch Darkly. This is actually a project that we helped them with. We helped them. They started out, they wrote their values when there were only 8 people in the company. Now there are over 500 people. And they needed a refresh to make sure it was true to their strategy and who they are today. And so if you look at the 5 values that they have, the 2 that I really wanted to highlight for you was, the first is widening the circle. We deliberately seek out a diversity of perspectives to get better results. We create space and opportunities for each other. We listen with humility and respect. When we don't get it right, we acknowledge our impact regardless of our intent. The other one, work impactfully, work sustainably. We respect our work, each other, and ourselves. We take accountability for doing our best work, and we perform at our best when we take care of ourselves. We're all human, and we're in this together for the journey, not the sprint. So those two, both Mozilla and Launch Darkly, these are examples of, again, visible artifacts support the equal opportunity, inclusivity, and valuing diversity. Okay, let's talk about language next as another piece of your culture. So thinking of metaphors, this was, by the way, this was something for me that was a major adjustment when I moved to the US. A lot of conversations I was in, there was a lot of sports heavy metaphor use, and it's something I had to ask a lot about. So I think when companies are very serious about DEI, they become more mindful too of the metaphors that they're using. Are they very American centric? Are they very masculine coded? Another related one to that, I would say, would be acronyms. Acronyms can drive efficiency, but they can also drive exclusivity, especially for people who are new to the organization. Imagine if you're in a conversation, it's like they're almost speaking another language, and therefore you cannot participate. Okay, another good example of language. So I talked about metaphors and acronyms. I want to talk about procedural language. So over here on the left-hand side, this is a snippet from a news article. So in the world of coding, master is the main version of code that controls other processes. So it's the thing that dictates to the other processes. And those other processes are called slaves. So thankfully, GitHub and a lot of other tech companies are moving towards this. They're dropping those terms in favor of main and replica instead. Pieces of culture. Let's talk about unspoken rules. So things that people don't, well, maybe your best friend in the company might tell you, this is how we do it here, so this is how you're going to have to play. But some examples could be the drinking culture, meaning it's happy hours after work. If you don't come, you're kind of seen as a wet blanket. Again, very exclusive. Another example of an unspoken rule is having a certain look expected of people. And the reason I have a watch here for this example is actually a funny personal example of mine. I was going through interviews after I did my first master's degree. I was having interviews at different large companies, and I went to one really large bank. And I remember this was my final meet and greet with the global CHRO, and we're talking, they have like hundreds of thousands of employees. So I walk into their big office in Manhattan, and the moment I got into the floor, not only was it really quiet and the lights were a little dim too, I remember looking around and seeing everybody. They were so dressed in their suits with all their fancy watches and all their jewelry. And in that moment, even before I met the CHR, I knew this was not a place for me. At that point, and probably still true now, I literally had two suits. I did not want to own more. I had first interview, second interview. Those were my suits. And I was thinking, I do not want to have this kind of a dry cleaning bill. I do not want to have to wear heels every single day because everybody, all the women were in stilettos. I self-selected out. I noped really fast out of that experience. But again, these types of unspoken rules, they can exclude people. They can make it not motivating for people to join. Okay, the next one, let's talk about structure. So now we're moving into the gray part of the sandwich, the meaty part of the sandwich. So again, think of structure, of how work is organized and how we drive focus or communicate the importance of that body of work by elevating it in the structure. This also includes the types of roles you have in the organization and again, who has decision-making authority. So when it comes to structure, the most obvious way to elevate DEI explicitly is to create a chief diversity officer. This is something we're seeing more and more commonly. I did a quick search in Indeed yesterday. They have over 1,600 jobs just for chief diversity officer. Who knows how many other iterations there are also of that. The other way is around creating a DEI council. So this is something we've worked at with other clients. This by embedding a DEI council in the organization, they're not just a representation of employees, but they're really an extension of the C-suite. So by putting it in that level of importance, you are signaling to your employees that this matters to you, and you're inviting multiple perspectives. Another good example of this is specifically creating roles to address inequities. So the example that I have here is Swedish Health Hospital, which is based in Seattle. So a little bit of backstory. I'm sure a lot of people here on this call know this, but the Black community has disproportionately higher prenatal complications, stillbirths, postpartum complications, and increased mortality rates, both for the mother and child. Like it is disproportionate as it relates to their population. So Seattle Swedish Health Hospital, they're actively building a network of doulas. So doulas are people who help during the time of birth. They bridge communication gaps and they help manage fear. They're building a network of diverse doulas to better serve underserved populations. So they've also set up a doula diversity scholarship to support doulas of color, LGBTQ doulas, and doulas from other underrepresented groups. Okay, let's talk about processes. So processes in a nutshell, how work gets done, who does what, when, and how. Okay, so there are a couple of ways we can think about business processes supporting DEI. The first is going to be about bringing in different representatives in the development process. And then another one could be changing the actual process and then inserting bias interrupters. I'm going to cover examples across all three. So for the first one, so bringing in different perspectives in the actual development process. Wegmans, this supermarket here, they're based in New York. They have about 50,000 employees. They send hundreds of staffers around the world to learn about different foods. So they send deli workers to France, Italy, Germany, Wisconsin to learn about cheese. And then the butchers, they're sending them to Colorado, South America to learn about beef. So that when they are selecting the products that they're actually going to be selling and when they are engaging with customers, these people are extremely knowledgeable. It is not just the big honchos. Is that the right word? Yeah, the big, you know what I mean. The big players up there at corporate who are deciding these products. They're actually inviting this type of perspective in from all their employees. And I will say I went to school in upstate New York. That's where Cornell is. Wegmans was the place to be. That is where we would go on Friday nights as grad students to get some level of entertainment, talking to the people, shopping. Their process of allowing all their people or encouraging all their people to get this involved in the business really reflects. You have Wegman, diehard Wegman fans like me. Okay, another example of bringing in different representatives. I don't know how many of you all on this call have had this experience, but I hated using my Amazon Echo or my Alexa. I don't know what it's called. I remember when my husband was at home, my frustration was that my husband has a very clear American accent. They could understand him, no problem. Could not understand me for the life of me. So this is indicative of the fact that they did not develop the software and test it with enough different types of accents so that more people could get heard. Needless to say, it is no longer here in our house. Another good example of bringing in different representatives during a business process is decentralized clinical trials. So whenever a new drug or therapy is going out to market, they do have to test it. And sometimes, or traditionally, or most commonly, they will have specific clinical trial sites that then the patients who are in that trial will have to report to. The problem is then it's excluding a lot of populations across the US. So there has been a strong move to have more decentralized clinical trials, which is a logistical challenge in itself, but it allows the data to be more accurate, and it allows more because it's allowing more people to participate in that process. So that's another example of how you're expanding inclusion at the process of the business product development. Talk about enablers now. So again, these are the things that support people as they are doing their work. It enables them to be able to do their jobs. So these are the categories that we're looking at: tools, ways of working, so how people engage with one another; spaces, again, physical and virtual; and policies, meaning the things you say, you must do it this way. So tools, this one might be an obvious answer, but it's assistive technology for people with disabilities. So using screen readers, I'll talk about my example up here very shortly, but examples could be screen readers. So that's software that's used by blind or visually impaired people to read what's on the screen. Screen magnification software, so you can zoom in and zoom out. Text readers. So this is software that helps people with a range of learning disabilities um, that will affect their ability to read text. So typically with text readers, they'll actually highlight the thing that is being read out loud. So it's slightly different from a screen reader. And then you can also have speech input software. So instead of typing, how else could somebody get their thoughts out on a piece of virtual paper? A good hack that a friend taught me recently actually is the use of descriptive hyperlinks. And the reason I said I will talk about it after is screen readers and text readers definitely need this in order for them to succeed. So descriptive hyperlinks just means that instead of using the word here, like in this example, to highlight the thing you want them to read, actually describing what the hyperlink is. So blog post and website usability. Because if you're using a screen reader or a text reader, all they're going to come up with is a whole bunch of hyperlinks that say here, 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 here. That does not help the person who is using this technology actually find out which link they should be clicking on. So that's assistive technology. And there's a whole bunch of research around that and a lot of different options. Google it. There's so much to come up that comes up. Another type of tool is services like Milkstart. I promise, by the way, I am not a shill for any of these companies that I'm talking about. I'm using them purely as examples. So Milkstork is a company that facilitates shipping of breast milk. So it's for parents who are traveling for work and who are breastfeeding, so they can ship their breast milk from anywhere around the world back to their baby. Companies will make this service available. I worked at Cisco before, and this was one of the services that we were using, especially for our sales organization. Another one could be Snack Nation. So having healthy snacks delivered to the office to keep people energized and healthy. And then, of course, having tools or access to family leave benefits that are inclusive for all, not just heteronormative parents, but parental leave also for adoptive parents, also same-sex couples. So all types of couples or all types of people, not just necessarily couples, I'm sorry, who are bringing children into their lives is the right way to say that. Okay, another type of enabler I want to talk about are ways of working. So sure everybody has seen this screen, this type of screen, so many times now, especially now in this world of distributed work. You may never want to see another screen like this. But an example of how you can embed inclusivity in the way that you work is for global distributed workforces, having team members share the pain when scheduling meetings that fall outside normal business hours, instead of it always being one dominant time zone and everybody else has to deal and just either wake up crazy early or go to bed super late. Sharing that pain across to show that we are all matter, we are all trying to make this thing work together. Another thing to think about when it comes to meetings is how you structure meetings to accommodate for neurodivergence. So really long meetings can take a really serious toll on people with ADHD. It's going to be hard for them to contribute the way that you would expect everybody else to. Another one could be around how you use video chat. So a lot of companies will default to you must have video on, but that is a question that every team needs to have, because will be different preferences and different personalities that will want to interact with video differently. Okay, another type of enabler are spaces. So having spaces for different types of processors and workers. I think most people on this call will have seen the open floor plan when it comes to office spaces. I have worked in one. I did not like it. But for some people, they will love it. Others, they will hate it. So by creating a workspace where you have options for people to be in this type of environment, but then also go to other places so that they can work the way they want to work, that's another nod towards inclusivity. Obvious one, gender affirming restrooms. So having people be able to pick which restrooms they want to go into and giving them the safety and the option to do so, having accessible entrance and exits. When it comes to virtual spaces, using things like Userway, which is a widget that you can install into websites, both internal and external, that allows you to modify how the text shows up on the screen. Again, to accommodate for people who are processing information differently. Another virtual space I would say is a communication forum. So REI has these things they call company campfires. It's an online forum where they have an exchange of two-way information from upper management and the store clerks. So that's an example of a virtual space. And then let's talk about policies. So again, policies are you all declaring as a company, this is how we must do things. So one example is most large companies are definitely in the space of supporting supplier diversity. So they will require that they have a certain percentage of vendors who are certified as diverse businesses or diverse business owners. Another example of a policy is pink tax. The pink tax is many women's products are upcharged as compared to the male equivalents. I think most women would know this. Think about razors, deodorant, you name it. For some reason, women have to pay more for those things. So this company Box, not our Box, like a different Box company, they have reduced their prices to make them equal to their male counterparts on a per ounce per unit basis. So this is a policy that they declared internally, is that regardless of what it is priced out there in the market, we're going to price it this way to price it the same as male products. They also originally they were doing tax rebates because some states, I think it's 27 states, they still charge about 4 to 10% sales tax on tampons and pads because they're considered luxury items. This is called the tampon tax. They would offer tax rebates to their buyers from the Box website. So we'll talk about metrics and rewards. So metrics, obviously, what we measure and therefore what we focus on. And honestly, metrics in my book, they are one of the most underutilized, but extremely valuable ways that you can drive people's behavior. Because you can tell somebody, this is how I want you to do this process, or this is what I want you to focus on. But if their metrics what tells you that they're performing are measuring something else, guaranteed they're going to focus on this one because it's going to affect their pay. So rewards is obviously what we reward. So in terms of metrics, I wanted to focus on leading metrics that would support DEI rather than lagging metrics. By leading metrics, I mean a leading metric is something that if you do it, it will lead to the outcome that you want. A lagging metric is looking at something historically and saying, have we done the thing that we want to do? So a lagging metric, an example would be representation, which is normally the first thing that companies measure when it comes to diversity. So gender, race, ethnicity, religion, those are the things that they're all tracking. I'm not meaning to say those are not important. You definitely want to track those things. But rather than putting emphasis on those, I would strongly recommend focusing on leading metrics that you know will lead to greater inclusion and equity and therefore diversity. So 2 examples I want to share with you is tracking how many of your interview panels are actually diverse interview panels, meaning how many of them include people of different backgrounds, race, ethnicity, and even gender, because you want your candidates to be able to see as many, you want to give them as many chances to see themselves in the people that they are meeting. You'll be surprised that this is not something that all companies have adopted yet. I think it should be the standard for everything, in my opinion. So percentage of diverse interview panels, meaning of all the interviews that you're all conducting across the company, how many of those are actually using diverse interview panels? Another great leading metric to use is participation rates in sponsorship and mentorship programs. So sponsors are those who will actively help you break through levels, ceilings in your career. Mentors are more of guiding you through specific technical challenges. So making sure that your people are participating, but also the leaders are participating. So typically we will primarily measure leaders volunteering to be sponsors and mentors to people. Then we also want to look at participation from the employee base, because again, we know that if leaders are sponsoring and mentoring, the chances that these people will rise through the company will be higher. Let me check the chat. Okay, another example I want to highlight. Okay, from a rewards perspective, this is super obvious, pay equity. So there's a study by MIT and Stanford researchers. They found that after MBA school, women were receiving less in terms of dollar amounts on their job offers, unless they did internships. So by introducing the idea of having them actually show how they do work, on average, the women, after the internships, the women received higher job offers to return for a full-time job. So that's another example of pay equity coming into play, and what interventions you can put in place to inform pay equity. This one, I just wanted to highlight the Green 2.0 Pay Equity Pledge. This is a campaign to increase pay equity for people of color, particularly women of color, in environmental organizations. Pay equity is the most obvious one. There is another one I want to highlight when it comes to rewards, though, which is recognizing and rewarding managers who proactively sponsor people who are different from them, who develop their team members, lift them up to advance their careers. You want to recognize those types of behaviors. On the flip side of that reward, you have to actually do something and terminate the people who create hostile and exclusionary work environments. You remember how I said earlier, you don't want the system to be sending 2 different messages. You don't want to be rewarding people who do this and then do nothing about the people who are actually detracting from the efforts you want to do. So the last category is people. I am not going to go into this because we have about 13 minutes left, and this is a giant category in itself. But I want to leave you with this thinking is the people part of your sandwich. Again, these are the skills and mindsets and experience that your people have. Your workforce plan, meaning how much do we need of this type of role? What kinds of people do we need filling those roles? When do we need them? And which locations do we need them in? And then looking at your full cycle of your talent management practices. I could do a whole webinar just on this, from hiring all the way to exiting, how you interrupt bias at every point, and how you create greater inclusion at all of those. Last thing I want to leave you with is, are you ready to be a system shaper? And by that, I mean, influencing all the things we had just talked about. Because as you make changes to that system, you are shaping the system to embed DEI in your organization. And I'm guessing most of you who are on here are working at companies. And the reason this matters so much to me is I truly believe that after public or government policies, companies are the second most powerful avenue to reshape society because they will impact the communities that they work in, meaning the physical communities that they're in. They will shape their customers' buying patterns. Like think of Amazon and how much that has changed how people shop. It will most definitely impact their employees' lives. And not just the actual employee, but also the people that surround them. When people are fulfilled and valued at work, they will be much better spouses, partners, friends, children, friends to other people. They will overall be better people. At Box, we believe work shouldn't just be a paycheck. I think companies have the obligation to enrich people's overall well-being. So, knowing that, I invite you to take on this mantle at your company. And I have a couple of tips for you to think about this when you are becoming a system, when you're embracing your role of being a system shaper. So, the first one is lift yourself temporarily out of the system. It is really hard to try to change things sometimes when you're looking at them so closely. All I can see are the wrinkles on my hands. But when I lean back, I say, these are my hands, actually, my left and my right hands. So to do this, you want to partner with somebody with fresh eyes, maybe somebody new to the organization, or actively try to put your newbie hat on. Remember what it was like when you first started in this department or that organization or that company, and ask yourself, like, why do we do things the way we do them? They may seem obvious to, once you're swimming in the waters, they become very obvious to you. But when you pull yourself back, and this is why I love being a consultant, you get to you start to wonder, why are we doing it this way? Why aren't we doing it a different way? The second other tip that I would have is to actively listen to others and try to see through their eyes. All of us will have one way of looking at the world. Um, there's this term, it's called Umwelt, which just means that every organism will experience the world based on who they are. So pretend you're in a forest. The bird over there has a very different experience from what a beaver. Are there beavers in the forest? Let's just say a beaver. The bird's description of the forest and the way that it sees the forest is going to be very different from how the beaver experiences and would therefore describe the forest. So being able to tap into another person's umwelt will allow you to, again, see things from a distance and see the whole for that it is. So listen to others, be really curious, and try to see through their eyes. The other thing I would recommend is looking upstream and downstream for impact. So if we make this choice, what could be the potential downstream effect of this? Or because we made this choice, what are the things upstream that led to this choice? The goal is you're trying to look for connections and patterns because that will allow you, again, to reshape the system. Another tip is embracing what if. So part of why I love what I do is I definitely see systems as like a puzzle where it's endlessly configuring, where you can change one element and it impacts the shape of the entire puzzle. So the beauty of systems then is there are so many ways that you can redesign this complexity. So system shapers are really creative and methodical. They say, okay, what if we were to change this? What could the impact be? And then the fifth tip, which will not be a surprise to you, is actively interrupt your bias, even when you think it is not present. So ask yourself flip questions, meaning, would I have reacted this way if Rachel said this to me instead of person X? And try to reverse the situation on yourself to see how you would think differently about it. Another way to actively interrupt your bias is gathering data, the right data and enough of it so that you can make an informed decision.